Well, just to get directly at this question, as I'm sure most of our viewers now know, several weeks ago we released this special report titled Nuclear Nawapa 21 Gateway to the Fusion Economy. And in the very first chapter of that report, we call for a Manhattan-style crash program to achieve fusion power. Now, interestingly, another report that was published just a few months ago was called to our attention today, called Fusion Power, a 10-Year Plan to Energy Security. And this was published by the American Security Project, which is an organization headed up by several significant individuals who are well known, including Norm Augustine, who is known as the head of the Augustine Commission on Man and Space, and he's the former president and CEO of Lockheed Martin. Gary Hart is on the board, former senator from Colorado, who was also a presidential candidate, and several significant retired generals, admirals, and other flag officers. So in this nearly 40-page report, the authors echo John F. Kennedy and call for an Apollo program by name to achieve fusion power within 10 years. Obviously reminiscent of John F. Kennedy saying, "We will have a man on the moon by the end of this decade." And they make a thorough review of all of the current status of fusion research, both domestically and internationally, both magnetic and inertial confinement. And they stress that it was only because of budget cuts in the 1980s and 1990s that fusion research domestically has been stalled, and we haven't made the crucial breakthrough on achieving a sustained fusion reaction. What they emphasize is that achieving fusion power will completely revolutionize the U.S. economy, not only because it's an almost unlimited energy source, but also industries will be made possible by means of abundant fusion power, which are not possible now, including mass-scale water desalination, fertilizer production, industrial applications of plasma technology, what we've referred to as the plasma torch, spin-offs such as superconductors, material development, small and large-scale robotics, and so on. But what they say is that the current timeline for fusion research development desperately needs to be accelerated, or else we're going to lose the skills that we still have today and demoralize the next generation. And a national commitment must be made by the policy makers of the United States. This is a quote from the report. They say, "The main barrier to an aggressive plan to develop fusion energy is political will." And they warn, should we fail to adequately invest in fusion energy, we will not be able to train the next generation of scientific leaders or create the necessary industrial capacity. So what they say in the report, and I'm just going to outline this briefly, they make 6 recommendations to achieve this proposed accelerated timeline. Number 1, a national fusion power commissioner should be appointed on the presidential level to coordinate and drive fusion research. Number 2, a component test facility should be constructed for the efficient testing and development of new materials necessary to handle the extremely high temperature required for plasma confinement. Number 3, multiple methodological pathways should be pursued simultaneously and in parallel, increasing the cross-fertilization of ideas and technology and allowing the necessary room for experimentation. 4, funding for fusion research at universities and national labs, which are currently operating nowhere near full capacity, must be expanded to accelerate discovery and innovation. They stress fusion institutions need consistent funding and a base from which to build. Annual appropriations for fusion must be sufficient to avoid cuts Innovation requires multi-year and often multi-decade planning and investment decisions. Fluctuating budgets with on-again, off-again funding is damaging to the scientific process. 5, they call for experimentation with alternative designs for fusion power plants, including modularization to standardize the reactor components to allow for mass production. And 6, finally, the full incorporation of American industry into a fusion-driven economy. And so they conclude with this quote, which I think is significant. They say, just like when America committed itself to putting a man on the moon in the 1960s, America must rededicate itself to pushing the frontiers of science and engineering forward. America must commit to building a burning plasma facility within 10 years, and that will produce fusion energy. This will require $30 billion over that time frame and would require several support facilities to test materials and push the technology forward. Under this Apollo program, the 6 recommendations listed above are necessary to move quickly to the demonstration plant. So my question for you is, would you agree that this approach of an Apollo-style program, John F. Kennedy-style leadership from the presidential level, directed from the top down, is the correct perspective to adopt if we're to achieve fusion power?
Well, that's included. But there's something else which has to be included too. We have made a mystique of science and engineering. And we have failed to see that classical artistic composition is not only an essential part of any such program, but that if you don't have that view, you won't succeed in your program. Because people talk about mathematics, and they don't understand the limitations of mathematics conceptually. They don't understand the relationship of science to Shakespeare, for example. And you do not understand Shakespeare unless you understand it as a scientific comprehension. I mean, I work with this all the time. I have fun with this. It's great fun. It's a great product. Most people don't even want to know about it. But this is the way it is, that we base ourselves too much on pragmatic constructions, and we think that mathematics or mathematical physics is an improved form of mathematics was adequate means to do so. It is not. Because the creative powers of the human mind are the real driver. It's not a specific skill which is known to exist or has been developed. That is not what drives man's progress. What drives man's progress is man understanding himself as he never understood mankind before. And when people don't realize that rock music and other rubbish actually destroys the capability of the scientist to achieve these roles. And therefore, it's an essential thing to create a cultural context. And it's not just to be nice to things like art. It's not the point. That the actual root of scientific creativity, as Einstein and Max Planck could have made it very emphatic to you, that it's that relationship. It is not mathematics giving you physics which gives you progress. It gives you the creative powers of Nicholas of Cusa in specific terms. Cusa's example and Kepler's follow-up on Cusa's work typifies what is the real source of science. So when people oversimplify science to make it a birth of mathematics, it is not. And the greatest scientists were involved with classical music, classical artistic composition, and these kinds of things. Because without that basis, you don't have the competence to do the things you think in physics can do.